My name is Douglas Merritt. I'm the owner and founder and artist at Vandermark Merritt Glass Studios. We started, technically that part of my career, the studio's name was Vandermark Merritt Glass Studios, was started in 1980. Prior to that, the studio was owned by a colonial village, for lack of a better term, and from 72 to 80. So in 80, we bought the business, and it was on my own. And Vandermark Merritt Glass Studios was born. And we've been blowing glass ever since, making beautiful work. I grew up in New Jersey. Grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. So very early on, I knew in my life I probably could not hold a job, that I would have to be doing something of my own. I would have to be in charge. I would be looking for a job every other week. I found myself very self-motivated as a young person. And my father had a number of businesses and always gave his children, there was four of us, an opportunity to work in any one of those businesses that he had. And at the age of 12, he let me hire a group of my little buddies, and we would lay brick walks for him, brick floors, and do all sorts of yard maintenance work in one of his shopping centers. And I just instinctively knew how to lead people. It was just something that because my parents and my family had been entrepreneurs all their life, it was an easy thing for me. So at the age of 12, I'm running this little crew of kids, like bandits. It was a ball. But it taught me, a lot of work, a great work ethic, and it was something that then led into this when this came along, glassblowing came along. This was a fluky kind of thing. I just knew that I couldn't be corporate America. That wouldn't fly. So at the point where glass was introduced to me in my life was a point at which now I'm 21 years old. I'm looking for what to do with my hands. I had figured that out. It's got to be tactile, it's got to be touchy-feely, and it's got to be dynamic and really keep your attention. I was looking for a garden hose for mixing mud. And the garden hose happened to be right outside the office where this meeting was being held. It fell apart, unbeknownst to me. There was a meeting about the glass blowing studio going on inside that building, and I had no idea. But what I did hear was the door slam and two gentlemen walk out, seemed to be pretty ticked off. And the next thing I know is that's when Jerry Vandermark comes in and is introduced into my life. And, my father sticks his head out the door and says, "Doug, would you come here a minute? I'd like you to meet this gentleman." And that's how I met Jerry Vandermark. He had worked in Bremen, Ohio for years under a guy named Carl Erickson, who had come from Scandinavia. He had come to this country early in the turn of the century and worked for Pearpoint and Mount Washington. But at any rate, I was introduced to him, and he asked me if I wanted to learn to blow glass. And my first reaction was I was stunned, like, where did that come from? And of course, again, he repeated that very emphatically. He was a no-nonsense guy. He said, I want to know, do you want to learn to blow glass? And I just thought for a minute, I said, sure. And it was just one of those fluky things. And at that point, I was off and running. I went to his studio in Virginia for a few weeks. The idea was to get a crash course with him and then come back up and run this little glass studio in what was going to be a craft village based on early America between the years of 1750 and 1850. That's how I got started. It was that fluky. I mean, one minute I'm looking for a garden hose, literally, and the next minute I'm going to become a glass blower. And I hated it after my first day. I wanted nothing to do with this. I was walking out. I left. I was leaving. And one of the young guys in the studio grabbed me and said, "Yo, wait a minute. Give this guy a chance. He wants you to be the best you can be. He wants you to be good." And as far as the heat goes, which was another thing that was really bothering me, was like, I think this stuff's way too hot for me. He said, "You should come back with a different attitude tomorrow. Give it one more day and just look at things differently. Understand that he wants you to be the best you can be. And he's not such a hard guy." Anyway, just that little talk to me from that guy changed my whole attitude, changed my whole life too. Because of it, I'm in glass today. I just fell in love with it. After that talk with him, looking at things differently, approaching it differently, and man, you couldn't pull me away from it after 24 hours. It was amazing, the transformation from one day wanting to leave to the next day, you can't make me leave. This was like hot stuff, man. I was in it. I was in it big time. I was loving it, and I've loved it ever since. I tell people all the time, I really, and I know this is like this cliche you always hear, never worked a day in my life, it's more like play. Well, let me tell you what, it really is like playing. When you go to the studio and you're just creating things that you've thought of, that you've dreamed of, that you've developed, and you're just messing around with that stuff, and it's happening. It's just so exciting. What better thing could you do? It's like playing in the mud, and then you're getting paid for it. Can you believe that? I mean, that's bizarre. People dream of that stuff all their life. So that's it, and it took off. And then one of the nicest things, that Jerry did for me, Jerry Vandermark, my master. He not only taught me to blow glass, but he taught me to build furnaces. He taught me how to build my own equipment. And then he taught me to batch my own glass, which is very important. Very few people in this country batch their own formulas. Generally today, things are purchased. You purchase pre-made batches or pre-made pellets, or you melt broken glass down, which is called cullet. We've always made our own glass out of sand, soda ash, potash, lime. Now, they're your 4 basic ingredients. There's a few others, but with those 4 ingredients, you have glass, period. You melt it at 2,300 degrees, boom, 24 hours, you got yourself molten hot liquid glass. Now, to make, we had other things that I'm not going to mention here. Those are my secrets, that refine our glass and make it very, very special to us. And then we made all our own colors, which is another thing. Today, the artists are all buying. It's almost like buying kits. Now, I'm not degrading their work, because their work is phenomenal. And today, the young kids that are coming out and coming up in this business with glass are doing some really dynamic stuff. The field has exploded from when I started, and that's a great thing. But they buy their colors pre-made. They don't know how to batch their own materials. And the other thing they don't know how to do is to build their own furnaces and build their own equipment. That was one of the things that people that bought my work really appreciated, because it's a way of life to me. And to be a way of life, you have to immerse yourself in this completely, 100%. I didn't want to just buy this, buy that, this, and then put it together and say, hey, look, this is cool. That, to me, was just not quite enough. The latest work that I'm doing, the florals, the heavy case florals. Before that, prior to that, I've done several other series of glass and types of work. But the most current work, I was looking for something, I started to do a lot of work with flowers in my own garden, growing flowers. I love being in the garden. I love the hands-on there too. I love the dirt, the getting into it, and just looking at those flowers, I wanted to translate that into glass. I thought, gee, that would be really cool. I don't see anybody doing anything like that in big vases, in a 3-dimensional kind of feel, with a lot of depth. And so we started working on those, and it was a long process, a several-year process, because what people don't realize is you have to make up all the parts to make your piece prior to beginning the actual finished product. For instance, those flowers are all made of glass, 100%. There's no paints, there's no enamels, nothing. It's all glass. And I have to make the rods for that, for lack of a better term, glass rods. They're like, what could I explain? Crayons. My glass rods, I pull them, of course I'll pull them 30 feet long. But if you cut them up in slivers, there's a profile inside. And those profiles get used in the making of the petals of the flowers, the stamens to the flowers, the stems to the flowers, and all those veined leaves and vines. All those rods are used in that process in various forms. Either you cut slivers off and get the profiles, or you heat the rod with the torch, and not like painting, where you can dab your brush in the paint and you can get a number of nice strokes and cover some canvas. You have only one shot with the glass rod to heat it, get the end hot and soft, and it's one stroke. So I'm continually having to heat the rod, stroke, stroke, stroke. Every petal's a stroke. Every leaf's a stroke. Every stamen's a stroke. There's a lot that goes into our pieces. Now, we had a lot of trouble in the beginning. But one of our biggest problems was we'd lay out all of those patterns on the surface of the glass, and then we'd gather over it because we're looking for three-dimensionality. And the way you do that is you decorate one layer, and then you'll stick that big wad of glass with the decoration on it into the furnace and cover it over completely again. You come out, and now all of that is locked in underneath that new layer of glass. And then you begin to add to your design. So now when you're finished with the piece, you've got this layered effect, and it's three-dimensional. It's not just flat on the surface. So you get a lot of depth, and you get a lot of realism where you feel you're looking into this, and grass growing behind it, stamens behind it, the leaves and petals are up here. So you're getting this real visual, three-dimensional feeling. And people always, I watch them all the time. They try to reach their hand in a vase and touch the flower on the inside. Then they touch it on the outside, and then they're trying to figure out, how the heck do you get that thing in there? That's just so cool. So I've succeeded in what I wanted to do, which is to draw them in there to try to figure out and capture them. What the heck's going on? They're so intrigued. And then, of course, I have to tell them there's no paints in there. That's all glass, and they can't even believe that because I've got all the little ribbings for the the veins in the flowers. If you look carefully in the pieces, you can see the little veins running through the color of the glass. It's not just a blob of color laying there. There's a lot of depth and reality in all those petals and the stamens. So it's a long process. But what would happen is in the beginning we'd gather over that and we'd blow the piece up and we'd turn it and we'd look at it. Holy crap, what was that? That's just a big colored bunch of mess. It looked like a bunch of muddled colors all blown out thin and no definition, no clarity whatsoever. It took a long time, and I'm not going to tell you how I figured it out finally, but I figured out how to make the piece without them crumbling and falling apart. And but they're heavy and deep and thick, and they give you a really wonderful feeling when you pick that up and look at it. You can see people get emotionally attached to the pieces, which is what you want. I mentioned shortly and quickly that the depth comes from overlaying gather after gather. Now, a gather is a bit of glass on the end of a rod, a steel rod. So you'll decorate that, and you'll gather more glass over it. Now you've locked that pattern inside. Now you can decorate further into your pattern. But when it comes to those bubbles in the I think like Lisa says, if I told you, I'd have to kill you. I'd have to break your legs. You ever speak to people on the phone for several years and never meet them, and you have a vision, and when you meet them, it's like totally like, oh, that wasn't at all what I thought. I actually got what I thought with her. She's just a wonderful gal to work with, and she knows her art. If you're purchasing art from her, you're going to get a lot, not just depth in art, but you're going to get depth in the artist, because she tends to get to know her artist very well. And then, and collectors want to know the artist as well as they want to know the artist's work. Well, that's all part of what they're buying. They're buying the artist as well as they're buying the work. So, and she does a very good job at that, I think. I've had a long career, and the work that I'm doing now is just one body of work that I've done, over probably 4 or 5 different series of work over the years since the 70s. And you can find that actually on the secondary market. A lot have been around so long now, it's becoming antiques. This is pretty funny, but no, the secondary market and the collectors, are buying those old designs and those older pieces. I've done 4 or 5 different bodies of work, but this is the most current. This is the one I'll be ending with. It's been a wonderful learning journey. Oh gosh, from the naivety of a 21-year-old to, a man in his mid-60s here now. Wow, yeah. There's been a lot of learning curve. It's been a wonderful, and I'm very excited about the young kids coming up in this career today. There's some really, really good glass artists coming up in the ranks. The designing and the conceptuality is second nature, but the glass is totally, the handling of the material is totally. That's one of the wonderful things. The way I learned was in a production setting. Jerry Vandermark taught me in a production setting, bang, 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 bang. And it taught us technically to be very good. So the work is second nature. I can be talking to you like this and still making my piece. The technical part of it, which I would never have thought when I started. Oh, never. It was so difficult to keep the work in control that I would never dream that one day I could be talking to you and still making my piece. Now, the conceptualizing of it and those things, that's a whole different ballgame, But that's always takes deep thought and it takes a little more process. But the mechanics of it become very simple. I'm trying to think. I read a quote. I don't think I can quote it exactly, but it was a very, very well-known artist. Basically, what he was trying to say is, by learning your craft, your art, technically, to a high level, frees your mind and allows you to dream while you're working, allows you a greater ability to move forward and be much more open and creative. So don't be embarrassed about, learning to be very technical with your art first. I think that's very important. Then do your dreaming, and then everything becomes very easy.